Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about the film The Incredibles from 2004. Superhero storytelling is something that you can often put a lot on. Anyone can have their own interpretation of a certain superhero story and be right to a certain degree, if you can metaphorically get that to fit into your point of view. Although Brad Bird maybe isn't a huge fan of comic books, he was influenced by kind of 60s style and stuff, he wasn't necessarily a comic book fan as much, but he basically gets the idea of the comic books that many people compare to The Incredibles, particularly Fantastic Four, The Watchmen, and X-Men. Not to say like he totally didn't read comic books at all. It's obviously, superheroes, it's obviously influenced by comic books. What Brad Bird does here is he understands the storytelling idea of a superhero story, the emotional idea of a superhero story, how you can read into it, whether it be from something like The Watchmen, which this is often compared to, or the X-Men, where you can take different things from it that maybe not necessarily is there or is there in terms of the subtext, and kind of read into it and have that be very relatable and real to you. And I think The Incredibles does that very well, but The Incredibles is almost a lot more focused in that, because it's not talking about necessarily like racism and anything of that matter, really. I think what it's really talking about is a dad who doesn't know where he fits into the world anymore, and seeing that world and that society that he once loved turn on him and change. Mr. Incredible is kind of forced to kind of grow up in a way, but not really have that healthy personal fulfillment and home life balance to make him this whole person that he would like to be. And The Incredibles is a really interesting film in that it's very commercial, obviously a huge hit, it's getting a big sequel and all that stuff. And if you really think about it, it's really about like a dad's midlife crisis with his family and how he has to deal and come to terms with who he is and who he's going to be in this version of his life, and really wrestle with all the different kind of roles and different kind of people that he wants to be. This honestly feels more like an indie film that somehow got wrapped up into a very commercial blockbuster. The balance that Brad Bird does in this is so amazing, and he does it so well. I often, when I watch Brad Bird stuff, I think of him as kind of the last of the kind of very much the Spielberg clone ilk, I guess. Not to say they're all just ripping off Spielberg, but that kind of ideal of like Zemeckis, was it Joe Dante, like a little, not really, Joe Johnston, people like that, where they are very much studio directors. They know how to be a studio director. They know how to do the kind of camera movements so the suits will be happy, but they're also very smart. Like, they're almost studio directors because they have the talent to pull off that studio direction, but they want to achieve more through that storytelling, and they want you to interpret things through that storytelling. It's like almost the smart cinephile studio director. And in terms of animation, I guess that very much is Brad Bird. I remember when he came to Pixar and was like, holy shit, they got the Iron Giant guy to come to Pixar, and it was amazing. They've never really brought acclaimed director over to Pixar, since this, but that's a whole other thing. It just felt like this is the coolest thing. Like, Pixar's already an amazing studio, and they're kind of going to help the guy who made the Iron Giant out to make another amazing film, and he'll get to have a filmography, which is like, I remember that, like, that talk in animation blogs and stuff. It felt kind of amazing, and it did feel different, and it does, in some ways, in this era, it does feel different because he wasn't really part of the Pixar brain trust until The Incredibles, and he's the only one to just solely write and direct a Pixar movie to this point. It was just all him. He's frankly talented enough to pull that shit off. This is really a different thing with Pixar, and it's very much a different film, because most of these films, before you had Finding Nemo, right before this you had Monsters Inc. and the Toy Story films, but most of those, or Bug's Life, and most of those, although they are dealing more with adults and dealing with other issues, this one felt like it wasn't really skirting around the idea that The Incredibles, the mom and dad, their marriage was very much in trouble. He was having a hard time dealing with these things, and that's really what the film is about. It's easier for a child to identify with like a dad looking for his kid, or monsters looking for a little baby, and The Incredibles doesn't really do that at all. The Incredibles goes for this kind of sadder story, to be honest, but it doesn't feel sad because Brad Bird keeps that kind of Spielberg mode up and going and moving, that poppy, beautiful store by Michael Giacchino, who, and I remember this was like the first time I'd really heard his stuff, to be honest. I remember people going like, this composer's amazing, and this was kind of like his big launching point. But it still has that poppy, fun feel to it, while also dealing with those issues. I think really a lot of what is amazing about Brad Bird, when he's really firing on all cylinders in terms of like this and Iron Giant, might be two of my favorites, although I pretty much like everything he's done except for Tomorrowland, is that he's really trying to talk about this big thing where he was having a hard time being a movie director, or of him being an animator and being a husband and being a father and having that work-life balance and feeling like maybe he's not there as much, but also not fulfilling his potential possibly as a director at the same time, and how to balance that. And I think this film really gets that in a lot of ways that I've kind of, I guess, grown with this film. I saw this film opening weekend. I remember the feeling of watching it. I remember watching specific parts of it. It meant a lot to me because I was so shocked at how amazing it felt to watch that film. In fact, I even derailed a college class I was taking at the time because he wanted to talk about the election, which had happened like the Tuesday before, and I cut him off, and he was like, when are we going to talk about The Incredibles? Who wants to talk about The Incredibles? And it derailed the whole, and this was a major election, by the way. I mean, it's a presidential election. And we just talked about The Incredibles for a good 20 minutes, which I don't think is just because of the power of me being annoying. I think it was also the power of this movie. And I remember how much it kind of compelled people to talk about it, compelled people to go, holy shit. Just seeing it at the time, and the DVD and how amazing the DVD was, just like pouring over this as a cinephile fan and just like loving this movie so much. I think I would watch this every 6 months for like a good 6 or 7 years. I just like could not let this movie go. Like the DVD is still one of my prized possessions, and yeah, I probably should get it on Blu-ray, but seeing it now and being a father, it was interesting because I was surprised at how I get emotional at certain scenes. I watched it a couple times before doing this review, and there's the time where he fights with his wife that I felt like emotional. I felt I could relate to it in ways because I often find it hard to like, you know, be able to make these videos and stuff and have a job and have a kid and get all those things done and do them effectively, and sometimes not feeling like you can do any of it, sometimes feeling like you'll never get any of it done, sometimes feeling like you wish you had these opportunities and things like that, and that your better years might be behind you. And The Incredibles is so good at showing that it is a much different rewatch when you're older. And if you're watching this and you're younger, whenever you do have kids, I recommend rewatching it because you almost feel like you're watching a different film. Start to tear up at parts that you didn't tear up at previously because the relatability of it is pretty extreme. I had taken a break from watching this film for a few years, and it really hit me pretty hard this time. Although this film always hits me really hard. It's just an amazing film. Brad Bird's so good at structure and establishing the opening documentary, establishing the characters and who these people were in the past, and then having this amazing opening sequence that very much establishes like what they were like, and you know, the last kind of glory night for all of them really before he's married, obviously at the end of the sequence, and then the kind of lawsuits that happen afterwards. But also the constant reminder, like the fat jokes in this at the time I thought weren't as funny when I first saw the film. Like that was probably the only thing I didn't necessarily love, just because I'm not like a big like haha that person's fat type of person really. But there's actually like a real plot reason for him being fat, and it's that he is older and he has to deal with it, and him being fat is a constant reminder of the fact that like he is not Mr. Incredible of the 15 years before or 20 years before. Let's say he was probably Mr. Incredible for a little bit, so I took some liberties there, and it's like he almost wants to brush it off. He does not want to deal with it. That's why he's gained that weight, because he is not wanting to deal with it. He is putting it off because he has so many other things to deal with. He has his family, he has this idea that he's still Mr. Incredible, and he doesn't want to look into it. And even when he sort of like loses weight, I guess he doesn't like, you know, fully, he's still like an older guy, but he's almost like trying to escape it. You know, he almost doesn't want to deal with it. He wants to believe he can still fit into the original suit. He wants to believe that he can still be Mr. Incredible the same way. And I think a lot of this film is that character understanding that things have changed and he has to be a different person. A lot of this is the kind of existential dilemma of Mr. Incredible, more so than Elastigirl or the kids, although I think he's a little out the kids as well, but everyone does have their own unique arc. Even Mirage has an arc, which is very well spelled out. An arc to who they are, but I think that scene at the end where the Incredibles are all together and they know their powers and they're all fighting together with Frozone to take down that robot, it very much does what a Marvel movie does now, where that big epic conclusion, people always say, oh, why does they always have to have these big, this big battle or something, like in Guardians of the Galaxy or Iron Man. It's not just about having that battle. I mean, it's a big movie, you need to have a big action sequence, I get that. But in the story and in the emotional arc of these characters, it means something. It meant something to the Incredibles that they are a family, they have united, that Mr. Incredible has come to terms with who he is and how to use that within his family and to get them involved and to be a better father. And that is a real emotional arc. That is a point to why they did that. And in The Incredibles, it kind of maps out that. I mean, this is 4 years before Iron Man happened. There were obviously Marvel movies, but the difference between Marvel Studios and like the licensed stuff. And it's so good at doing that, because I think when you get to those moments, you feel like it's earned all that. It's almost like a victory lap, because they kind of sort of earned that like a couple scenes before. But it means something that they are all able to come together as a family and defeat this villain, that he is able to understand that he is not alone anymore. He's not a lone wolf. He's not just Mr. Incredible looking for, the glory. He can still be Mr. Incredible in this family unit, but he has to find a way to come to terms with that is the best way for his family, and still be a person in his own right, which I think is a hard thing for a parent to do. It's like almost impossible for most parents I know, kind of give up on doing anything because it's just like it's so almost impossible. It is an impossible task, but in the end he finds a way to come to terms with that. Although maybe it's impossible to actually do things like that, and it's impossible to be Mr. Incredible or to be Brad Bird and come to terms with it and make awesome amazing movies, except for Tomorrowland. They still do it, and that's the point of this arc. And I love that about this movie, because it's kind of like a really joyous family film, but also deals with something that I think a lot of family films don't. And coming from, I guess, my own perspective, which I guess since I'm speaking this is like the one I'm going with, is that a lot of family films don't deal with that. They go with the kids' point of view, but this is still a kids' movie, which I just think Brad Bird does so excellently well. It's speaking to the kids, but it's also letting them deal with the fact that their parents are like people as well. They have their own wants and needs and flaws and everything like that. Parents and how they have to deal with how they're changing, which they often don't because they're still busy with these kids. And also I think it says a lot about fandom, the Jason Lee character, or Syndrome, or Buddy. I'm still like, I'm half convinced what is his real name. Like, I don't want to look it up. I'm sure it's on the Wikipedia, but like, I'm just gonna like keep it to, I like to think it's Buddy. I sort of like what that says about fandom, where he's one of the reasons one of those major lawsuits happened, by the way, because if he hadn't gotten in the way and that bomb hadn't caught on his cape, the subway thing wouldn't have happened. And then he is also the reason for their return. He's kind of the architect of all that, but it's almost like what he views as his interpretation of fandom, and how, he's almost like sort of, I know we're talking about toxic fandom now, but he almost feels like the ultimate toxic fandom villain. And I like how they wrap that into the idea that so many superhero movies at this time, and it's a superhero movie trope that I actually hate, except for in this movie, is the idea of like all these people have powers, but the villain, need to also have powers, and they're obsessed with their powers. Instead, it's like a fan who's basically sort of kind of making up the show of, making this ultimate villain who can take out all the superheroes and kind of be a superhero for show, and so that he can be the ultimate superhero, like almost as a superhero celebrity. He wants to be this manufactured superhero since he knows so much about superheroes. Mr. Incredible was his favorite superhero, but he had like other superheroes, and he was so upset that he could never be part of this, the thing that he was a huge fan of. He has to absolutely destroy it. He has to take his own interpretation, but he knows about monologuing, he knows about all the tropes and everything like that. He's a massive, huge fan of superheroes, and he wants to be one no matter what. And I think it's definitely like of the people who like what happened in Iron Man 2, like what happened in, I think it comes up in X-Men quite a bit. It's either like they're losing their powers, or these other people have similar powers, or Superman 2 and all that. In this, it's like the best version of that, because like it's such a unique spin on that idea that I still kind of like it. I almost like am more interested in Syndrome as a character, because this film is really great at world building. Like they spent a lot of time on world building, and you don't really get to go into who Gazer Beam is or who Gamma Jack is. That's like my favorite picture when you're going through everybody. I'm very curious about Gamma Jack. I know nothing about him other than that picture, but I like that they show all those pictures in it, and it fleshes out this whole world. There's this whole, it is very much a world building film, and it does it in ways that only tie into the story. It's a very smartly written script. You'll notice, like, if you watch it, I watched it a couple times in a row, and you notice that there's certain lines of dialogue that come back through other characters. There are themes that play out throughout very, like, effectively and very simply. It's almost like what Zemeckis was really good at in his prime, where it didn't feel complex, but it actually sort of was what he was doing. You know, you get the mood and how these people are feeling. A similar thing that almost Syndrome is, that they can't be special, and if they're not special, maybe no one is. And Syndrome sort of feels the same way, but took that philosophy in a different way. And but like showing that there are other superheroes and that he killed them, and you know, the whole idea of these people with capes and everything. You know, there's just such a rich world. Like, you sort of only get to meet the Incredibles and Frozone, that's it. I sort of like that it's small, but you know that there's a much greater world out there, but obviously all the other supers are older and don't probably want to come out, things like that. Or just go to that island and be murdered, I guess. There's so much of this film that I just love. I love how visually rich it is. I love how Brad Bird really uses kind of sunlight in it. I like how, like, the sun is setting at the beginning and the end of this film. It's setting like when the whole idea of superheroes are setting and when the story is setting. How he uses sunlight, how he uses light when Mr. Incredible is stopping that suicide, and you can get, like, the lighting in this film is absolutely amazingly beautiful. I think it was really one of the first Pixar movies where I just, like, loved the lighting so much. You can very much tell, like, this was a lot of 2D people coming to, these are a lot of Brad Bird's team from the Iron Giant working on it, and how he uses the 60s style, although I don't think this film actually takes place in the 60s because someone uses a VCR. If this took place in the late 50s and you had, like, 15 years, that would, like, at the earliest, I think this is, like, definitely would take place in the 70s, to be honest, but whatever. If it was 58 and it was 15 years from 58, that would absolutely be the 70s. It doesn't feel like the 70s. I think it's just like a different version of reality, really, and it's best not to think about those things. I've always loved this film. I always like how efficient Brad Bird is and how well he is at establishing all these different characters and giving them different arcs and having amazing scenes with certain people and establishing who these characters are. Like, each scene is so much about that character. It is not just a plot motivator, you know, it's a plot motivator and about a character and about this thing and establishing this, and it's all about the story, but it's very much a character driven film as much as it is a big studio blockbuster. I mean, most of this film I was thinking about Mr. Incredible and Elastigirl and, you know, their existential crises and, like, how they are as parents and what they're doing with this, and that is a very smartly written script, and that is a smartly made Hollywood film, because I think they have some amazing sequences. I like how it references everything from X-Men, which was much more of a current reference at the time with the Cerebro kind of place, and then even having a Mission Impossible reference, which is kind of interesting. I love this film, and I think I will always love this film because it's definitely one of the greatest superhero films of all time, because it was able to say a lot about superheroes. It was able to do Watchmen better than the Watchmen movie was, because it uses that kind of changing of the guard of superheroes, making superheroes outlawed, as kind of the changing of his life and him getting more tied down and being married and having children and how he's going to deal with that and a changing world. And that's very much what adulthood is. You see the world changing, and suddenly, like, you don't really know who, you know, these people who are famous are anymore. You don't know really, like, the changing attitudes, and you don't really understand why people say lit so much, because it's like, does that really mean lit? It just feels like you're overusing it, frankly. The Incredibles is an amazing, beautiful, epic of a wonderful and, you know, incredible movie, and it's probably one of my favorite Pixar films. It's definitely the one I've rewatched more times than I can think. Maybe the original Toy Story, but it's one I always come back to and try to unlock secrets. And sometimes I just don't want to unlock secrets. Sometimes I want to just keep seeing the same secrets. Sometimes I just want to laugh at Bon Voyage because it's a funny name. I think this is one of Pixar's best and one of Brad Bird's best because of what it says about him personally and how personal this film feels and how personal it can make me feel, while also sitting there in awe of what he accomplished as a filmmaker. It is one of the grandest statements and grandest achievements by a blockbuster filmmaker of that decade. And that's a pretty fucking good decade, the first decade of the 2000s in terms of filmmaking and studio filmmaking, because he was able to say a lot more to a lot of audiences than was really possible at the time. He was able to do an independent film as well as doing kind of almost like a Spielberg energized, like Raiders of the Lost Ark kind of stuff. Brad Bird both loves the 60s, the 70s, the 80s. Like, there's Return of the Jedi references in terms of when Jack Shack is running, they made it look like, you know, in the speeder bike sequence, so you couldn't tell. There's so much in there. It's just, I don't think I could ever fully go into all my feelings about this film, and I don't think my feelings for this film will stay the same, because obviously they have changed. And I think it's a film I want to show my kids. When I finished it this time, I was like, I can't wait to, you know, have a family movie night and watch it with my kids. But I also felt very personal about it. Like, am I gonna, you know, start crying in front of them or something? Because I think of very much where I'm at now in my own life. But I think it speaks to the emotions of this film and how well made it is and how great Brad Bird is as a writer-director, that he was able to pull all this off. And it's a film that I mainly liked because as kind of escapist entertainment, while also understanding it was dealing with issues even when I originally saw it, kind of letting it evolve and mean more to me and being able to appreciate it even more. I can't wait to evolve and mature continually with this film and see where it is and see where it speaks to me and reaches me. And I think it says a lot about Pixar and who Brad Bird is, that he was able to make a very personal, big budget blockbuster in such a way that I still feel both thrilled and amazed by a film that I also feel maybe reveals a little too much and speaks to me in ways that I couldn't have really thought it ever would when I initially saw it. And it reminds me of being younger and loving this film and loving what Brad Bird does, but it also hits me and relates to me in ways that I never thought was possible. That I think The Incredibles will always probably be one of my favorite Pixar films, and I think revisiting it now, it shows to me that it is a Pixar film I can't wait to grow old with. So if you have seen The Incredibles and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.